Another day, another video about Cole Caufield of the Montreal Canadiens. Now, this has been somewhat of a pattern over the past few years where we consistently make videos about the same guy weekend in and weekend out. And it just so happens that yesterday we made a video talking about him and Ottawa Senators forward Tim Stützle potentially getting robbed of a chance to compete at the All-Star game. But today we're talking about a different thing regarding Cole Caufield, something that actually matters and something that's actually kind of important. So, all-star memes and jokes aside, let's head over to probably the most intriguing part of the current Cole Caufield conversation, his contract. Because when it comes to this player and his impact on the Canadiens, we all kind of know that he's one of the good ones. 36 points, 46 games played this season, on pace for 64 points in an 82-game year. Also on pace for 46 goals on the season as well. It's kind of down from what it was a few months ago, but at the end of the day, Cole Caufield still is a very good player for the Habs. Under Martin St. Louis and the 82-game sample that St. Louis has had under Montreal so far, Caufield is like almost at 50 goals on the dot. It's pretty close. So this is one of the better players the Canadiens have. He's 22 years old, and his current contract of an entry-level $880,000 deal is expiring at the end of the season. 2022-2023 is the final year of this deal, and as the guy is on pace for 46 total freaking goals, you could definitely make the argument that his number for next season, for the year after that, for the next few years potentially, should be pretty high. If Caufield gets a pretty good extension of beefy magnitude and beefy dollar amount, it wouldn't be all too surprising. But the conversation has really opened up as to what that number could be the past few days. In fact, here's an article on The Score going over everything you need to know, published by Josh Goldsmith from yesterday. It's linked in the description below, but essentially it talks about how earlier this week, it was reported that the Canadiens and Caufield's agent, Pat Brisson, they opened preliminary contract talks about a month ago. The 22-year-old winger confirmed as much on Friday and acknowledged that he has given it some thought. You try not to think about it, but you can't really get away from it, the Canadian star told the media. It's everywhere, and you hear it a lot. But for me, I'm just trying to stay away from it. It's going to happen when it happens. Obviously, I love being here in Montreal, I love this team, and I love this group of guys, so I'll just take it one step at a time. But for sure, it's in the back of my mind. And of course, it's gotta be in the back of his mind, right? The Montreal Canadiens haven't had a 40-goal scorer in... Okay, if I say the number, it's probably going to be wrong. It's been a while since the team has had a 40-goal guy, let's just say that. And Caufield is on pace to being that this season. If things go well for the Montreal Canadiens next season, you could very well see Caufield be on pace for 50, 55 goals if everything goes right. Of course, predicting 50 goals out of somebody who is only 22 years old is kind of nuts, but for Cole Caufield, he has been so good for the Montreal Canadiens that it's kind of appropriate to have unrealistically high expectations, in my opinion. But when it comes to that sort of projection, of course, if you're somebody who is of that caliber of a player, it's tough to not think about the moolah, the money, all the bags of cash that you'll be able to get as a hockey player playing in this circumstance. He says here that honestly, he doesn't really see it like that, where he talks about the dollar amount or the terms and everything. It's probably just about the best fit for me. Pat Brisson, the guys behind the scenes, take care of those things, but I'm not too worried. Now, in fact, when it comes to certain dollar amounts, even though Caufield himself is kind of saying that it's the agent's responsibility, it's not really his thing, but it sort of is on the back of his mind, there are some reports that I also thought were interesting to talk about, like the one that we had from Darren Dreger on TSN 690 yesterday, how Cole Caufield will be looking for a bigger extension than what Matt Boldy got in Minnesota. 7x7 ain't cutting it. Now, the thing is, if the Canadiens want Caufield at or around $7 million a season, it will likely have to be on a shorter-term deal. When it comes to that 7x7 comparison, I wanted to talk about the guy that is on the receiving end of that contract, Minnesota Wild forward Matt Boldy, also 21 years old, or he's 21, turning 22 in April. Caufield just turned 22 earlier this month. And Boldy is a really intriguing prospect turned player because when it comes to his contract extension, which kicks in 2023-2024, so again, a season after this one, Boldy is in a spot where he got the bag, 7x7, and he's a guy that's on pace for 56 total points this season, as opposed to Cole Caufield and Caufield's 64. Now, the thing with Boldy is that he was never really touted as being the top one potential goal scorer like Cole Caufield had been touted to being, even when these guys were teammates on the NTDP in 2018-19. Boldy was never really in that same mold of offensive caliber through the roof potential. He did have some offensive tools, and we've seen that on display in the Minnesota Wild system the past few years, but when you talked about the points, when you talked about the production, it was always Hughes and Caufield, and maybe Zegras in there too. Boldy was seen more so as the Swiss Army knife, a guy who could play really well on the boards, a guy who could play well defensively, play on the PK, and also have some very good offensive flair to his game as well. He's got some really good deception and puck transferring abilities. He just kind of knows what is the right play to make most of the time. He was a Swiss Army knife heading into the 2019 draft. And this season, as he's been a pretty good producer for the Minnesota Wild, and somebody that you could definitely debate has top line, top six potential in the NHL in his future, there definitely is a lot of excitement when it comes to the future of Boldy. But of course, $7 million by 7 years is a lot to give to a guy who is currently on pace for only 56 points, and that's taking age out of the equation. If you just take a look at a guy who gets 50 plus points in a year, $7 million might seem a bit heavy for that. But of course, with Boldy, he's only 21, we're expecting him to become better as the years go on. You've seen these other long-term deals given out to guys a little bit earlier than their primes, like Tage Thompson, for example. That's looking like a pretty big steal. Jack Hughes also got a big 8x8 contract extension, and that guy might be getting 100 points this year. So we've seen this work really well with some of the other teams that have had young talent develop and progress pretty quickly. So for Matt Boldy, if the Minnesota Wild are confident that he can go through that same 1 to 2 year transformative type of hockey playing role like the Hugheses and the Thompsons did, then hey, if he goes out there and has like a 70-point year next year, for example, all of a sudden 7x7 is looking like a pretty good steal, considering how good Boldy could potentially be when he's 24 or 25, maybe 26. And that dollar amount sticking to where it is, plus the cap going up, etc., etc., it's going to be cool. For Cole Caufield, though, because he's always been in a position where, when it comes to just points by itself, a lot of people would say that Caufield had higher point potential than Boldy. It makes sense to me when Darren Dreger says on the radio that, hey, if the Canadiens want to get Caufield to that 7 million AAV mark like Boldy did, you're probably going to have to sign him to something shorter than 7 years, because when Caufield gets up to that contract and it finishes, okay, he's going to be, let's say, 28, 29 years old. He's going to be at the tail end of maybe posting multiple 50-goal seasons. And then what? You're going to give him like $10, $11 million? Artemi Panarin, Mitch Marner, these guys are making 10 plus, 11 plus million dollars as wingers right now. And if Caufield is able to be somebody in that caliber of play a few years down the line on a bridge deal, then, hey, you might have to shell out even more money for this guy by the time the cap goes up and by the time it's 2026, 2028, or whatever. So, for Caufield right now, having him play the way he has, it's been very good. However, this guy's going to have to get paid, and we all know that it's probably going to be worth it. Mostly. I mean, I'd be quite surprised if it wasn't worth it at the end of the day. I do believe in Caufield, and I do think that he has the potential to be one of the top goal scorers in the league, but at the end of the day, this is the very beginning part of that. Contract conversations, bridge deal, long-term, whatever. The Montreal Canadiens have themselves a task at hand here, and it starts out with Matt Boldy's 7x7. And then it probably goes up from there. So talk to the comments your thoughts if you're a Canadiens fan about Cole Caufield and the entire conversation regarding his contract. If you're a Minnesota Wild fan, what are your thoughts about Matt Boldy and the contract that he was given? 7x7 is pretty steep for a guy who has only really played, his best season was last year. He had 39 points in 47 games played. That's a very good point per game number. However, the guy's only played 91 games at the NHL level, and he's still at the start of his 20s. Committing $49 million to a guy who has only played less than 100 games worth of a sample is quite bold. But do you think it's worth it? Thoughts in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed this video. Juraj, and bye.